Riot Game developers could breathe a huge sigh of relief as the Regional Open in Dalian had a very diversified top 8. As you can see, the only non-unique deck in the top 8 was a Draven with 2 copies, then we had one Irelia, Kai'sa, EZREAL, Sivir, Fiora, and a Jax. While the entire top 16 had more copies of the same, there were also 2 Ezreals in the top 16 that didn't convert any of their matches. 4 Irelias overall, 3 Dravens, 2 Kaisas, 2 Ezreals, and then of course the 1 Fiora, 1 Jax, and 1 Sivir. What is important to note is that in this top 64 in Dalian we only had 27 Dravens, and I know that this is the lowest number, but we also had the lowest pick rate of Draven overall. But in the previous regional last week that we had 40 Dravens in the top 64, even though the pick rate was smaller than 2 weeks ago, and 2 weeks ago we had only 37. So it's like it doesn't correlate exactly with like the amount of pick rates that we have, because overall Dravens have an incredible conversion rate. But this weekend we had the smallest from all the weekends so far. And also what is very important to know, that we had 14 Irelias. So Irelias is picking up pace when it comes to popularity in China. But also very worth noting is that in the entire top 64, for the first time ever, we had kinda successful conversion of Kaisas, because typically there was only 1, maybe 2 Kaisas in the regional open so far, but this time we actually had 6, and of course the winner. So it seems like the meta is stabilizing slowly in China, and I fully anticipate that Bologna and Las Vegas will have a very diversified meta, even though Draven is gonna be the most popular one. But I do expect a lot more creativity and expertise when it comes to piloting the decks from the European and American players. Didn't say this for quite a while, but Kai'sa won an event, and not only a Kai'sa, a control Kai'sa list, which I spoke about a week ago. Oh wow, I've seen you leave a comment and a like and subscribing to the channel. Wow, that's awesome. Thank you so much. In the previous regional open, 37th place in that tournament was a deck almost identical to this one. There are some key differences I'm gonna talk about, but this event was being won by a control Kai'sa list that is playing not a lot of creatures. The winning Kai'sa had Obelisk of Power, which is basically used like in a Draven deck, where you can just drop your Kai'sa on turn 1 when you're going second, but avoid doing that against, of course, a yellow deck that can just completely wreck you with a Cool of the Week. Then we had Void Gate, because it works beautifully with all the damaging spells that you have in your deck, and Reverse Roll, which is a little bit of a head scratcher for me, because I feel like it is something that Dravens want to get, right? And you don't really get that much value against Dravens, but at the same time, against other decks, it might bait people into thinking they're safe when they're on the reverse row, so then they get deleted by a damaging spell. And it also kind of works for your small units that you don't really have a lot yourself, so maybe the reverse row is actually not that bad of an idea in a controlling deck list like this. The deck list from Chengdu that I was talking about in the last week's video that took the 37th place had the fortified position instead, because your opponent doesn't really benefit from the position himself, because you're typically not attacking into him, while your small units are benefiting from that when you're going first, and they can take control of this location. Suddenly they become essentially like a 3 or a 4 drop, right? So that's an upside. Other than that, one of the most significant changes from this deck and the one that actually the deck that actually won was the fact that the 37th place in Chengdu had Get Excited and 3 Time Warps, which was like this kind of a engine to deal a lot of damage while recurring your Time Warps and do something with them when you don't need them. Now the winning deck list over here that we have from Dalian doesn't play this package, and I'm not sure what to think about it. It's an significant change to how the deck functions, that's for sure, because deleting your card advantage from hand requires you to play more card draw. So essentially by playing that package, you're kind of forced to play like 2 or 3 cards that will massively replenish your hand. That's why the previous week's copy had 3 progress days, right? This one only has 1 progress day, but also on top of that now plays Void Seeker and 1 less Time Warp, because there's no Get Excited. So you're not required to have such a huge hand to get a benefit from the Get Excited. But at the same time, man, I really like Get Excited. It's such a great and surprising card, specifically when your opponent doesn't see it coming, because how on earth can you deal like 10 damage for 2 resources, 2 energy, and you just delete a unit? Like, it's kind of crazy, you know? It's like even a Darius with a Cleave gets deleted by a Get Excited with a Time Warp discard from your hand, and then it's relatively easy to replenish your hand. But this version that won the event here this weekend in Dalian didn't play that, and instead had a Noxus Hopeful, had a copy of Bellows Breath, had an additional copy of Piercing Light, and an additional copy of Smokescreen and Void Seeker, while cutting Progress Day, cutting one Time Warp, and cutting an Ikafian Rain, if I remember correctly. No, this one doesn't have a Ikafian Rain. Well, anyway, those choices are significant, like they're significantly altering the way that you execute an entire strategy, but at the same time, I do love the fact that we have additional copy of Piercing Light, because I feel like this card is just insane in current environment. It completely wrecks your Dravens that just like typically are slamming a 2-drop into the Draven, then they go to a battlefield, they concur, and then you go Piercing Light, tap Kai'Sa, recall one of your runes, and delete both of those cards. Like, that is such a blowout. It's 100% worth it, and having 3 copies of Piercing Light allows you to do this very consistently, because you need it on your turn 2. Right, so it's a significant change for sure, but the one that I like. I'm not exactly sure what to think about the one-offs in case of Smokescreen and Void Seeker. Now, Void Seeker is a little bit more understandable because it replaces itself, so it's not that big of a deal that it's a one-off. And those 2 cards are essentially replacing the Progress Day, right? Because we had 2 Progress Day in the previous week. Now we have only 1 Progress Day. We don't need that many Progress Day because we don't play Get Excited, as I said, right? So in this case, the person here that won in this week's event is playing those 3 copies over here that have a little bit of synergy with each other, right? We have Bellows Breath, which benefits from cards that are removing might from units. So we have Thousand Tail Watchers and Smokescreen, an additional copy of essentially something kind of like a Thousand Tail Watcher to kill something more easily, right? So there's a little bit of synergy added here. So it's now I kind of explained it myself and kind of convinced myself, yeah, that this might be an option. I am not certain which option is better. Is Get Excited better or this deck is better? I kind of like both. I'm playing myself a control Kai'Sa deck list that plays 2 Progress Day and a Premonition, because I do like the fact that Premonition is reaction, so you can use it in your opponent's turn when you're not exactly certain what's happening. Like, do I need the resources to actually kill something? Can I just draw cards? Even though it's a little bit more expensive, but you know, like Progress Day is actually 6 energy, and I'm talking about the expense in power. But overall, I'm a big fan of this Kai'Sa, and in the last week's video I was saying that if I would be playing a major tournament and I didn't get the cards that I needed for like a Draven deck, I would definitely play a Kai'Sa that is like a control list like this. So this is a direction that we definitely have to think about in the future. Now it's on everyone's radar, right? Last week it was like a little bit under the radar because it didn't like have a top 16 finish, but with this week winning it, like Cat's kind of out of the bag, even though this is nothing really like new. This is just an upgraded version of your previous Kai'Sas, but with more package when it comes to just removal, straight up removal. Now in the sideboard we have also small changes. The Chengdu version was playing 3 Rocket Barrage, 3 First Forerunners, and 2 Thermo Beams, and I really like this sideboard because there's a clear function of the entire sideboard. That's something that I really like in decks in general, because First Forerunner is against everything that is not purple, but specifically against yellow, because this deck should have some issues into a control-y version of Victor, right? But this week's winner had 2 First Forerunner, 2 Rocket Barrage, 2 Thermo Beams, and 2 Brynhirs. So essentially, one is -1 Rocket Barrage, -1 Ferris Forerunner for 2 copies of Brynhir. And I like both approaches, because essentially what does this say is when you play a 3+3+2, you have a clear direction of your sideboard in very specific matchups with like a huge, let's say, skew into I want to draw those cards as soon as possible. When you have a direction of 2-2-2-2, you can squeeze in essentially an additional answer against one more matchup typically, but in this case you have a wide array of cards that you don't need the copies as soon as possible because they're a little bit slower, right? Think about it this way. if you feel like you have a problem with one specific matchup, you want to have a free copy, right? If you think like there's another matchup that is like very irking you, like for example here, the previous Chengdu player had 2 thermal beams and rocket barrage. In his mind, he had a problem with cards, with decks that play a lot of gear, so he packed 5 answers for it, right? So he had a very specific direction. Now here, this player said, I don't fear the gear decks that much because I already have 4 cards that are destroying the gear, so I'm gonna add something that will be great against green and purple decks, which are currently one of the strongest colors because of counter spells and rebukes, right? In case of green and purple. So we're adding 2 Brynhirs while still have, like, let's say, reasonable options when it comes to against yellow with the 2 Ferrous Forerunners. Although I do think personally that if I would have to do this sideboard myself for like the next event I would play, I would probably cut 1 Thermal Beam or 1 Rocket Barrage and just add a 3rd Ferrous Forerunner, because in my local metagame I feel like there's a lot of victors. Second place we have the Rat Ezreal, the Pit Crew Ezreal, with the Cole making a very big splash in the top 8, finishing the 2nd place. And I've been speaking about this deck 2 weeks ago, I think, or maybe that was a week ago, in my Chengdu video, or the previous Regional Open, I can't remember, but I remember making the video about this deck because it was so innovative. I had no idea that it actually worked this way, because Pit Crew says when you play a gear, but it doesn't say gear card, so it works with gold, and in this case Cole untaps your Pit Crew, which is a great synergy. And it kind of feels like a small oversight from the developers. I'm not sure how this will be like going into the future, because it does feel a little bit weird that the developers allowed a unit to be untapped so many times in one turn, when you can legit just go from one battlefield to the other battlefield. If you have ganking, go back to base, like even start the round in your base, go battlefield, go back to base. Like that feels like a little bit weird, and it seems that it might be an oversight, but I'm not a developer, so I'm not gonna be speaking with certainty. We're gonna see how that goes in the future. Is it too powerful? I don't think it's too powerful. It has its downsides, and one of the downsides is playing against decks that have shit ton of removal. And well, unfortunately for this Ezreal, he met a Kai'Sa in the finals, so this Kai'Sa had definitely an inherent advantage over the Ezreal, but still was when I was watching like with my side eye the finals, I would have said that it wasn't that terrible for the Ezreal, but maybe because there were not like really like a lot of falling stars drawn early, because this deck has a really big problem with Piercing Light and Falling Star. If your Pit Crew gets deleted with a Piercing Light, because even with the Cole you still have 4 might and then it gets deleted, you have to worry about if there's a unit on the battlefield because of that. But Kai'Sa can always shoot her own unit on the battlefield to target the Pit Crew in the base, so there are problems there, right? Ezreal can get just deleted straight up by a Falling Star, so there's a card shop, and because there's no 2-drops over here, those removal spells will definitely be used against those targets and nothing else, right? So you have to think about it when you're playing against a deck like this. It's gonna be an uphill battle. But overall, this is a very unique deck when you play the game. Like in general, when you play mid-range like decks in Riftbound, even though you might play completely different legends, they kind of feel like you're playing still the same game. And then there are decks that are not feeling like you're playing the same game. They're feeling like you're playing a game of your own. That's like Miracle Draven, for example, or this Rat Ezreal, because you have completely different mechanics that your opponents or the decks are currently not representing. So coincidentally enough, of course, both of those decks are purple, so we have the Ezreal in 3 copies. I personally played a version of this deck with 2, but I can definitely see why you want to have 3, because it's such a cornerstone of this entire deck. 2 copies of Scrapheap. Of course, you have to have 3 Seal of Discord, but what is interesting in the choices of the battlefields, we have here a Hall of Legends, which in theory will allow you maybe to draw 2 cards per turn for the cost of 1 energy, if you were able to target 2 units or gear of your opponents in the same turn. It's not that easy as you maybe thought it is. It's really not that easy to target twice something in the turns, because even though you have an option to play like a Frigid Touch on 2 opponents' units, or just choose twice 1 unit, and you have the Stupefies, the Rebuke, the Arcane Shift, the Wages of Pain, it's all cool, but the problem is that you're an expensive deck. There's a lot of power cost. That's why we play Seal of Discord. So managing your resources, your energy, it's pretty significant. It's a significant portion of skill that is required to pilot this deck well. So even though you feel like you're gonna be drawing a lot of cards with the Prodigal Explorers, Sometimes the game just doesn't align this way. But at the same time, Hall of Legends is a very neutral battlefield, so you're not gonna be giving something to your opponent that will typically they will benefit. Draven doesn't benefit from this at all. Right, for example, like the best decks that are using Hall of Legends are essentially Victor and Azir, and everyone else is kind of like, meh, well, it doesn't matter that much, right? For Kai'Sa, actually, you know what? When you give this to Kai'Sa, she might actually be kind of happy, depending on what the round entails for her, right? But yeah. Then we had Veiled Temple, which allows you to untap a gear or detach a gear. In this case, I feel like this is mainly the purpose of this battlefield here is gonna be to untap your gold. So essentially you have a do your own Seal of Discord on demand when you need it, kinda. And then Void Gate, of course, because again, it's not super beneficial for most opponents, and against you it doesn't really benefit that much as well, because most of your units have like either a lot of health or just not completely like a lot of health, and you don't really play that many units, or even don't even stay on the battlefield. So the Void Gate benefits you more, even though you don't really have that many like damage removal spells in this deck. There's essentially Arcane Shift, Wages of Pain, and that's it. So it's like, oh, okay, there's one copy of Unchecked Power, but the +1 on here, it doesn't matter, right? So that's one of the things that is like kind of like a neutral and a small benefit in theory. It's more about scaring your opponent into going into the Void Gate than anything else, because even if they go to the Void Gate, you might actually not benefit from it. But other than that, we have at the top end is Watchers and Mind Splitters, and obviously those work perfectly in this deck, because you have the option to just like completely wreck your opponent's hand when you're controlling the board at the same time. And even though they're expensive when it comes to the power cost, your deck should create a lot of gold. The problems that this deck has is when it doesn't draw the Pit Crew and the Core. Like, you really want to have that as soon as possible, because that's like your main engine. So it feels like this deck really has a problem if it doesn't. But for that, you have, of course, 3 Cold Shots, 3 Stack Deck, Scrapkeeper, and Ezreal. So you're like drawing a lot of cards, right? You are able to dig through that. One of the important things to note, that it doesn't have 1 copy of Time Warp. I've been speaking with my friend, and he suggested playing 2 copies of Time Warp. This player in particular here chose to play 1 copy of Unchecked Power, and I feel like that is a very valid choice, specifically when you're playing in Swiss and your opponents have no idea what you're playing exactly. Like, your list might be just a little bit different, right? And there's not many people playing around Unchecked Power. Unchecked Power is just like, why? Like, why? Some people don't even remember this card exists, and then suddenly you're being hit by 12. And it's not about like destroying 5 units with it or something. If you go 2 for 1, that's already good with Unchecked Power. It's 7 energy and 2 power, sure, but destroying 2 cards already worth. If it gets more, that's even better. But at the same time, paying 7 energy and 2 power to destroy like a huge unit that has like 10 might, that's also decent. So you have to like stop thinking about like this is such a huge removal, it has to delete like so many cards. Just think about it like, if it kills 1 unit that's really big, it already did its job, right? I kind of hate that this deck doesn't play more Arcane Shifts, but at the same time, you don't really have like that many units, so what's the point? And also, we have to remember that Arcane Shift unequips your equipment that is attached to your units. This can be benefit, but it can also be a pejorative effect, because sometimes you don't want to unattach a Call or Boots of Swiftness, but sometimes you might want to, depending on the situation of the board. So it's a cool toolbox, and there's 1 Rebuke in the main, 1 Hard Bargain. Like, there's a lot of different kind of answers that you might need in the end game, but not exactly you want to have them in the early game. Personally, I hate one-offs, but I do play them myself from time to time in my own decks. In the sideboard, we have 2 Switcheroos, 1 Last Rites, 2 Orns. Orns are particularly, like, I don't have to explain, it's definitely 2. And we have a lot of gold. 2 Factory Recall. I would say this is basically just against Dravens and, like, I mean, essentially red decks, right? You want to avoid being like killed by some instant speed, quick draw, like gears. Essentially, Factory Recall is the best for that. And to some cases, like in some cases, it can be used against your own equipment if you want to change like the target for it or something, right? Or untap your rat when you have no other option, but it's in the sideboard, so that's not your primary use case. People were telling me like, oh, this is great against Aurora, and I'm like, that doesn't really do it shit against Aurora. Like, there's no tempo loss. Like, sure, your opponent will have to play your Aurora again, but that's the, like just a playing big creature from his hand. Like he wants to do it anyway, so it's like it's not that big of a deal that you're gonna bounce it. It will be just, even when someone plays Aurora and you destroy it, he still got one creature out of it, which is like, yeah, it's okay, you destroyed one. But if you just bounce it to the hand, he's like, okay, you gained a little bit of tempo, but most likely that doesn't win the game, right? It's just delays the inevitable. I think that's the word. Anyway, one Bellows Breath. I feel like that's a card that probably should be in more options, in more copies over here, because Bellows Breath is such a fantastic card with Thousand Tail Watchers and with Frigid Touch and with Stupefy. But at the same time, maybe the metagame doesn't require it, right? Like, essentially, this is perfect against Swarm decks. We don't really have that many Swarm decks right now in the metagame, and if it kills like 2 units, then it's already pretty decent. But at the same time, you have a lot of other options how to deal with units yourself, and because you have a rat that is so mobile, Frigid Touch and Stupefy typically is enough to clear those units with just the Pit Crew. You have to remember that Frigid Touch actually can remove someone's might entirely, right, to 0, but to kill them you still have to deal damage, like combat damage or with a spell. Anyway, I digress. Super cool deck. If you want to play something that feels completely different from anything else, Ezreal with the rats is perfect for that. It's a complex deck that requires practice, and you can fuck up a lot of stuff while playing this deck, so it requires practice, but it is a very rewarding deck to play. In the top 4, we also had Randy, our European French player, who took the Sivir, Miracle Sivir, essentially. That's what it is. The deck that is playing exactly the same engine that any Miracle deck would play, which is Ezreal's, Fizzes, Razas, Seals of Discos, Last Rites, Cold Shot, Scrap Heaps, and Traveling Mansions. All of that is present here. There are some key differences. For example, over here, like instead of Bushwhack that we had in the Draven as a one-off, here we have essentially more copies because orange represents a big difference when it comes to the potential of card draws here. So we have 2 copies of Confront, which is your units enter ready, which is like Bushwhack, and you draw a card, but it costs you 2, cannot be hidden like Bushwhack could. But I know, like, I use the Bushwhack as a hidden card because essentially opponents were certain that it's definitely not Bushwhack. They were thinking this is Fight or Flight or Switcheroo and not Bushwhack, so I just kind of bluffed my way there. But I'm saying it's like a small factor, it's like 1%. Anyway, I digress. So we have 2 confronts with draw your card if you just need the card draw, and you have On the Hunt, which allows you to ready all the units that you have. So essentially, it doesn't matter if you attacked already or you play new units this turn, you can play On the Hunt and ready your entire army, which does make a huge difference when you compare it to a card like Bushwhack if you already had presence on the board. This is a very key card in the Sivir deck, but it's only just a one-off because you don't really need that many of them, right? You just have this as a finisher. Other than that, some interesting choices over here that I really like is the fact that we have Sigil of the Storm, Obelisk of Power, which are essentially the exact opposite. Obelisk of Power gives you +1 rune right at the beginning, so remember this deck only has 6 2-drops. essentially there's 3 Traveling Merchants and 3 Treasure Troves. Treasure Trove can be considered a 2-drop because you just pay 2, it doesn't do shit, but then you can just destroy it, so it draws you a card for power, of course, draws you a card and channels a rune, and then you can get gold because of Battle Mistress. So essentially the net positive is that Treasure Trove creates you a gold and draws you a card because it doesn't deramp you, because you kinda are ramping by destroying the Treasure Trove and paying the cost. But if you have a Seal of Discord, suddenly you're just starting to ramp up your net positive like outcomes. The revenue coming out of the Seal of Discord and Treasure Trove suddenly to ramp up with the gold as well. So it's very easy to get to high amount of runes in this deck if you have this kind of engine early in the game, which allows you then to be very aggressive with cards that are power hungry. And we have power hungry cards in this deck. We have like 3 copies of Sabotage, which are phenomenal if you consider them not costing you power. Paying 1 to recycle a card from your opponent's hand. Wait, is it a recycle or discard? Actually, it is a recycle. No, recycle, yeah. And recycle is definitely better than discarding it, because in current environment you don't want to put cards in your opponent's graveyard. So Sabotage is as a key aspect here as well in this deck, and allows you to, when you don't deramp yourself because you play the Sabotage, suddenly you're reaching an end goal faster, right? And then challenges are cool removal in the base. It of course requires you to have a unit, but that's not a problem. You get to the Rasas pretty early. Now, is this better than Draven Miracle? I don't know. I played maybe like 2 games of a non-min-maxed version of Sivir Miracle like this one. My version was a little bit different for sure, and I played it like 3 weeks ago, so I need to actually check it. But anyway, my point is, I'm practicing Miracle Draven myself because I feel like it's more consistent. But maybe I'm wrong. I need to test it out and had to have like an actual opinion about this than just talking about the deck itself. Now, what I wanted to talk about is also the Sigil of the Storm, because it's the opposite of Obelisk of Power, because when you conquer, you deramp yourself, right? You recycle a rune. It's a little bit of a synergy. It's kind of funny because if you have to do it, at least your Battle Mistress creates a gold token because you recycled a rune. And at the same time, your opponents typically don't want to do this, because why on earth would you like to recycle a rune for yourself for just conquering the location? So it's kind of a cool aspect. It's negative for both players, but it's less negative for Sivir herself. End Zone Warrants, of course, it's a beautiful card for anything that plays Scrapheap. So yeah, in the sideboard we have a lot of one-offs. So we have 1 Downwell, 1 Ruin Runner, 1 action. I'm actually not certain why only 1 action. It's such a beautiful card. Maybe the gear decks are not a problem that much for this version of Sivir, specifically with the free sabotage in hand. You know, maybe that's the key aspect over here. 1 Hard Bargain. Then we have 2 Cannon Barrage, which is a perfect answer to Overzealous Fans, for example, and overall it just cleans up the small shitters that are sitting on the battlefield, right? And then we have Unyielding Spirit, which kind of fell out of favor in set 2, but I like seeing it. I think Randy did envision that the Kai'Sa will be making a small comeback, and Kai'Sas definitely don't like seeing this card, specifically when they play a version of deal more damage, because you have so much projectiles in the current Kai'Sa's list that Unyielding Spirit is like a really big game changer, right? So congrats to Randy on the top 4 finish. I know there was a controversy about what happened in this game. I'm not gonna get into that because yeah, I don't, you know what, there was a controversy. Maybe I'll make a separate video about it, but I don't want to get into the controversy now when it's gonna be like 15 minutes of talking. Then in the top 8, we have a mid-range Draven, a very standard package of cards, but there are a few choices that are a little bit different. So for example, we have 2 Vice in the main deck while playing 2 Ride the Winds, and I like that a lot. That was something about that I spoke about like a month ago, that I was so surprised to see Draven list all of them playing Ride the Winds but not playing Vice, and then they were cutting Ride the Winds so that it made no sense to play Vi anymore. But now I see this deck list actually perform pretty well and has Ride the Winds and Vi, which makes me happy. Like, this is literally perfect for this deck if you play Ride the Winds, of course, because Vi is just like an engine, like a win condition on its own. It doesn't require anything else. It just requires cards in the graveyard. You're gonna have cards in the graveyard. It's maybe not as many as a typical Annie deck, right? But at the same time, the Glorious Executioner doesn't have to play as fast as an Annie, so you're gonna just ramp up those cards in your graveyard over time anyway. Other than that, the key differences here is like 2 Spinning Axes in 1 Cleave for some reason. I don't ask, like, I have no explanation here. Why is this not a 3rd copy of Spinning Axe? I have no idea. Then we have 3 Fight or Flights, which is also neat to see 3 copies. Not every single Draven is playing 3. Well, I think Fight or Flight is just essentially just like a cheating code, especially in the mirrors as well. Then another thing that I really like in this version of this deck is the 2 Piercing Lights. Most Dravens play Falling Star in the main instead of Piercing Lights. Now, I think there's benefit to both. Falling Star is overall better, right? Because the 2 and 3 breakpoint is different for a lot of the metagame like choices, like for example the Ezreals, right, that are sitting in the base, while Piercing Light is really good in mirror matches because, as I explained before in this video and in many other videos, Piercing Light can kill a 2-drop and a 4 might unit in the base like a Draven. So like a typical opener from a Draven opponent is gonna be met with demise when you're gonna do a Piercing Light, and it doesn't matter that you derammed yourself by 2 runes. You kill 2 opponent units, including a very key piece of his puzzle, which is the Draven Vanquisher. So including the 2 Piercing Lights, I think it's a good choice. Is it better than Falling Star? I think that just strictly depends on the playstyle and your feeling about the metagame and how often like you're gonna be playing mirror matches. And you know, you should be playing them often. Anyway, in the main we also have 3 rebukes, so there's a very specific angle. That's the thing that I like about this deck. Apart from there's one cleave, this decks look pretty clean. Imagine if this one cleave was just replaced with the spinning axe and suddenly, wow, this looks pretty consistent. Now I know that cleave is great with Darius, but at the same time, it's like you have stack decks, you have a lot of 2-drops, so maybe it doesn't matter to have just that one random cleave, you know? In the sideboard, we have the 3rd spinning axe, which I probably will assume that it was coming into the deck every single time, you know? Then we have the sideboard Ferrous Forerunners, and as I explained before, I was really angry at all the Dravens in China playing Ferrous Forerunners in the main when the rebuke in mains is just so often. So I'm very happy that they adapted to this. It was 2 weeks too late. That adaptation took 2 weeks too late, which I definitely feel like in Europe and in Americas, I feel like this change would have been literally done in like 2 or 3 days. Now, I'm not saying this with malicious intent. I'm just saying that China doesn't have, as a region, as much experience as we have in Europe and in Americas, so it takes them longer to develop those kind of habits that I feel like we have from the decades of playing card games in our environments. And those patterns, those are literal patterns that we had in other games. Like, I could go through every single tempo-based card game and this example would be found, where you move really efficient units to your sideboard because the metagame doesn't benefit them and against a specific, like, really often matchup, right? But in other matchups, it's a fantastic card. That's why the Ferrous Forerunner is in the sideboard. Brynhir's in the side, again, like, could be in the main. No one would be mad at you if you had them in the main, but at the same time, Mind Splitter is just strictly better in most matchups than Brynhir right now, so they occupy a very similar slot. And 2 times against the odds, I don't know. Like, I really don't know what to think against the odds. Sometimes it's just game breaking, sometimes it just feels like meh. But if meh, it's like the floor, and wow is the ceiling of the card, maybe it's worth playing it. At the same time, it's like you would need to have, like, I don't have a playbook for how I sideboard with my mid-range, right? Like, if I play a mirror match between mid-range Dravens, what am I siding out here? Am I siding out am I siding in against the odds and the spinning axes and Brynhir's? That is 5 cards. What do I cut here? There's like not that many options, you know, like maybe to 2 Vi's, but if I cut 2 Vi's, well then holy shit, like the win just loses just that potential finish line, right? Do I need that in the mirror match? Probably. So what else do I cut? The decks are just so tight. It's unbelievable how hard it is to find those key pieces and knowing exactly what you want to cut in specific matchups. The one Irelia that got into the top 8 is I don't want to say El Presidente VIP kind of deck, but kinda. You know, it's like it's still that element. We have the Irelia, we have the big Dravens, and of course we have herders because they're just insane. But on the top of that, we have 3 sneaky deckhands. Now, we only play 1 Zhonya's and 3 Guardian Angels for obvious reasons, right? When we have smaller drops, we maybe don't want to have more copies than 1 Zhonya's. Some people, when they're playing more copies of small units, they don't even play even 1 Zhonya, which is also understandable, right? But what I was speaking about last week is that the decks that we have seen Irelia like did well with, was having sneaky deckhands in the sideboards. In this case, this deck actually plays them in the main board, and it probably significantly speeds up the game for them. And also because the locations are very specific, we have the paper tree and we have the obelisk of power, maybe you'll have the chance to play the sneaky deckhands your turn 1, because you will choose obelisk of power when you're going first. Dreaming tree is most likely when you're going like first game, right? And then when you go second, it's paper tree. That's at least what I think. I never played Irelia myself, but that would be my logic here, because you want to drop your Irelia on 5 resources, right? So in case you can do that if you play Obelisk of Power. So if you play Obelisk of Power, you can drop the sneaky deckhand, but at the same time, in not maybe every matchup, because you kind of need to make sure that your Irelia doesn't die. So you need the Guardian Angel or the Zhonya's. I think it depends on the matchup. But in theory, you could play sneaky deckhand into Irelia if that's something that you have in your hand. So with the Obelisk of Power, right, when you're going first, which is very aggressive. And then everything else in this deck, I'll be honest with you, looks very standard. Like, there's not many cards that are surprising over here. It's maybe the ratios are a little different, like 1 Rebuke in the main and no in the sideboard, right? Then it's another Siren in the sideboard. I'm not certain why do we need 2. I know it's a very powerful card in this deck, but at the same time, when you have 2, it feels like a little bit of an overkill. 1 Heart of Ice in the sideboard, while none in the main board. 3 times Boots of Swiftness. Okay, so this one catches me off guard. But at the same time, I do understand. Like, I was complaining about Irelias that were not playing Boots of Swiftness. Then they were playing 1, and I'm like, well, at least it's playing Boots of Swiftness. But I feel like this card breaks the deck, right? I mean, maybe not breaks, but it makes it so much more efficient. It's kind of crazy, right? So Boots of Swiftness with 3 copies are definitely understandable when it comes to the amount of the cards that we have here. Other than that, yeah, I feel like this is pretty standard. And also in the top 8, we have the first appearance of Jax. And I didn't have a lot of occasion to speak about this deck. I played it literally 1 time myself, so I have to make some homework for the future, because it definitely is gonna pick up in popularity once it top 8 a regional. Like, that's just how it works. Like, when a deck top 8s, you're gonna see them more often in TCG Arena. People will be like, well, actually this looks kind of cool, and it does. It really does look cool. Jax is a really cool deck. Has a lot of, like, you know, those small things that kind of look like you're doing something impressive, but they are not really that impressive, but you do a lot of shit. You know, it's like you do a lot of movement for not a lot of effect, but it looks cool. It's kind of anyway, the deck is it sounded like the deck is bad. It's not. It's actually pretty cool. It's difficult deck to play. I would say it's on the surface, the deck looks pretty simple, because how like, you know, how difficult can be playing units, attaching weapons and bashing bashing heads and their skulls with weapons, right? So anyway, but it's more complicated than it looks like. In the locations, the battlefields, we have Monastery of Hirana, because we do have buffs in this deck. We have the Sea Monkeys, we also have the Pit Rookies, and we have 3 times Warmog Armor, which allows you to buff creatures when they concur. So you have an easy way of benefiting from the card draw of Monastery of Hirana. And as you would think, as in with most orange decks, you have a problem with card draw. This is why all the 3 battlefields, the role of them is to draw cards. And we have seen similar choices in early Fioras, because you're just playing a orange-yellow, mainly orange, and this deck is kind of 50-50, but it's like you do need the card draw. So it's definitely a power hungry deck as well, because of all of the equip. Even though you have the option to move them with your legend like this, it's still a lot of equipping. Then we have Sunken Temple, which works with mighty units to draw cards. This is the location, the battlefield, that I personally dislike. I do understand that it's a necessary evil, but it feels like your opponents are gonna be benefiting from the Sunken Temple a lot, and benefiting from Sunken Temple feels bad if it happens to your opponent when you play it, right? So it's one of those battlefields that I kind of like iffy, but that's like the other options are not as good in theory. And Dreaming Tree is kind of similar. Like even when in set 1, when I was playing Kai'Sa, I just didn't play Dreaming Tree, because it really felt like my opponents are benefiting from it on an, let's say, unreasonable amount of times. Even when I benefit from it, I don't want my opponents to benefit that much, because I want to have a better card advantage than them, and I'm able to do that because I'm playing Kai'Sa. But in this deck, like, it actually does make sense, because you're just like not really like, you don't have engines to draw cards, but at the same time you have a lot of buffs. And Counter-Strike buffing, drawing your card, like that's sick, right? You have challenge, you have the disciplines, drawing 2 cards, like that. All of that stuff is really good. Now, the key pieces here, I feel like whenever you play against an orange deck, you should assume that the deck mains actions. So all of the equipments is kind of risky now, and this deck runs 2, which is a very big deal. Like it is a game breaker. Like, and specifically now, with like Fiora's picking up steam as well, because they were doing well in 2 previous regionals, and other decks always playing equipment, it feels like action is not a necessary evil, but it's just a good option. It would be a necessary evil if the card would be like like under the rate, but it's not. It's a 4/4 with a weapon master. That's alone, it's like pretty decent. So 2 actions in the main are very good choice. When it comes to the 2 drops, we have 8 of them, but you also have to count that you do have Warmog Armors, which, you know, can always be a 2 drop if you didn't get it to draw, and you have Guardian Angels as well. So there's a lot of stuff. Like, if this deck misses a 2 drop, like, holy, that is unlucky. That is really unlucky. And playing 2 Warmogs on turn 1 is also an option. Like, you're gonna benefit from them. Like, just play 2 in the beginning, right? So yeah, there's a lot of stuff like this. This guy we didn't see for quite a while, the Wizened Elder. It just gets +1 might when it's buffed. So essentially 1 buff gives it +2, and it becomes a 6 might, which is pretty decent. Now, the most common way of giving it a buff will be the Warmog Armor. So essentially this becomes a 5 energy 7, right? Which is a good deal in itself. And of course, we have the card that can only be played in this particular archetype, which is Aphelios. Aphelios does have a lot of potential outcomes because you have to choose whenever you equip, and you have you have readying your runes, you have channeling runes, and you have buffing a friendly unit. None of them are game breaking, but they are pretty efficient in a deck like Jax. So that's a cool thing. And Counter-Strike would be a great choice. Overall, I feel like Jax would be performing really even better last week than this week, because this week we had more Kaisas that are actually dealing damage, and Counter-Strike is way worse when something can be countered with like a Hexagray, right? So Counter-Strike overall is still a very powerful spell. So this, if you want to play again a deck that feels like a little bit different than other decks, Jax is a great choice. Is this a good deck? It's decent. Is it a fantastic deck? I don't think so, but I think it's fun, and Riftbound is slowly becoming more about your mastery, and I would say I'm kind of happy to see this kind of trend in more and more card games. Like, for example, this was a non-factor like in Flesh and Blood. This was a non-factor in Star Wars Unlimited as well. When you're like an expert on your deck, you're gonna perform really well. So people were known for playing a specific character or specific archetype that then was transferred to a different character. And in Riftbound, I feel like that's gonna become a case as well, which makes me pretty happy, because identity, like connection, is very important. And also as a content creator or like a pro player, being known for a very specific thing is a pretty cool storyline. So yeah, Jax is pretty cool. Congrats to him for taking the top 8. And also in the sideboard, yeah, well, didn't talk about the sideboard. More Zhonya's, Twonks, Emperor's Divide, which is a very surprising card when your opponent doesn't think about it at all. Suddenly, like, you are like semi-safe. Oh, I know that my opponents cannot go from one of the battlefields and attack me on the other one because they don't have ganking or way like of like readying units. Suddenly Emperor's Divide is being played, and you're like, woohoo! That's a lot of movement happening in an orange green deck that should not have that movement ability, right? So it's a very cool tech card that you can have in your sideboard. I know the Lucian was outside of top 8, but there were 2 Lucians at the top 16, so I wanted to just to show you them quickly. Both of these versions were both of those decks were playing the combo version, so Chinese players are just in love with this. I do believe that the non-combo version is probably more consistent and maybe better, but so far I don't have any proof for that. So anyway, there's literally not much to talk about here. Like, you have all the same cards in both decks. They do play 3 of the Skyfall Arian, 3 Trinity 4s, and the standard like orange-red cards, very aggressive. In this case, you have 3 Legion Red Guards and 3 Game Jammers. The other deck plays 3 Game Jammers, no Legions, because it just plays more gears and less 2 drops, so it has less explosive start when it comes to the ability to just drop units. But overall, they play similar locations as well: Sunken Temple, Forge of the Fallen, and Obelisk of Power, or Sunken Temple, Forge of the Fluffed, and Zoned Warrens. In the case of the other one, I feel like Zoned Warrens might be a better choice because you want to go through your deck faster to establish the combo, and sometimes the 1 card difference is gonna be huge because overall Lucian doesn't really draw that many cards, as you would figure with a lot of the orange decks. So yeah, just wanted to show you this. those two decks over here, they do have significant different sideboard cards, but overall they are very similar, and they still decently performed. I mean, top 16 is nothing to scoff at. Actually, they should be very proud of themselves. Reaching top 16 in the 500 people tournament is a big achievement. But what does suck is that there was such a small difference for them to get the medal foil card. Just think about this. You both reach top 16 and one of the guys is getting the medal foil card, the other one doesn't. That's a huge blow when you play a deck that is completely unrepresented. I mean, is it actually? There were 10 players out of 500. 2 of them reached top 16. It's pretty good conversion, to be honest, but it does kind of suck for the second player who reached that top 16 and doesn't get a medal foil while playing Lucian. It does suck. Unfortunately, Rift deck doesn't have every single deck yet, so we were missing 2 decks from out of the top 8. One was Fiora that is missing, that was in the top 4, but it was playing a hook version, and it's not really that different for sure. At least the cards that I was seeing being played, they were absolutely not different from the previous Fiora that we talked about last week in the video. So you can check that out to see like what was there in the previous top 2. And then the other deck that is missing is a Draven, which you don't really care that much about it, right? So anyway, I'm gonna leave a link in the description because this is gonna get updated for sure. So once this video is live, maybe even then, we're gonna have those 2 deck lists already live. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video and me talking about those decks, and yeah, see you guys in the next video. Leave a like and leave a comment if you would like to support me in creating more videos like this.